Oregon City Vapor Sheet by Raina Barnabee, Part 1. Everything fell apart when we moved to Oregon City. I had always suspected my partner was bipolar. He would drift into these bouts of severe depression for 3 to 6 weeks a couple times a year. But the one that started when we moved to Oregon City lasted much longer. I loved Jay. He was my Aladdin, my happily ever after. And never in our 5 years together did I consider leaving him until this period of time. He wasn't speaking. I'd ask if he wanted breakfast, and he'd make a soft sound. He still worked some, though I couldn't fathom how. At night he would crawl in bed with me and we'd push our backs and heads against each other. But in the day I was so lonely. I hated Oregon City from day one. There was just something about it. It was only 20 miles from our old place in Portland, so the weather couldn't have been different. But it seemed darker and gloomy. The rain in Portland brushed my cheeks like a fresh mist, but somehow Oregon City's rain was more of a splatter, like it was being chucked at me. Technically speaking, the town had beautiful landscaping. There was a top and bottom of town, the bottom running along with Willamette River with rows of antique shops and an old courthouse. It is one of only 5 places in the world that has an outdoor elevator to take pedestrians to the top of the town. Going by car is steep, and I imagine biking up would be near impossible. Our rental was at the top of town along the major road. There was a stoplight right outside, and we quickly put thick curtains up so people wouldn't look at us while waiting for green. And when it did turn green, we could hear everyone step on the gas in unison. But this place was cheap, and we were used to cheap. Portland prices had been steadily rising without us taking much notice. We held on to one of the few cheap places left. But then our landlords foreclosed and we realized the city had grown too much while we stayed in place. And we both barely worked, honestly. I did massage for a chiropractor that was open only 3 days a week, and he took book to hire moving jobs. We were broke. That's how we ended up in an old music shop that the owner was renting as a living space for very cheap, probably because there is no way it was up to code. The owner had spray painted the address on the front of the house with red paint and littered the front yard with her trash, including an old toilet, and the building itself looked tired and forgotten. I was always afraid that the ceiling would cave in on us in the night. If the Cascadian quake had hit, that ceiling definitely would have become part of our faces. But my biggest grievance with Oregon City was that it took Jay from me and wasn't giving him back, because I was low on friends and social skills. I still spent all my time with Jay while he went through his depression. When it was time spent in silence, from the top of the city we would drive west out of town to this country church that had a huge grassy lot and a gorgeous view of Mount Hood to throw the ball around for his dog. When we drive out further to the state park to hike. 6 months rolled out like slides from a silent film that someone dubbed dog noises over. I have a journal entry from that time that says, "Look, I know I've been in love more times than I can count on my hand, but I love you. Does that mean anything? Wake up. Am I saying anything? I tried shaking you. I thought I've been shaking you, but I've been in the corner this whole time, sank down low with my chin to my knees. B. I promised myself I would leave when he started to feel better. I couldn't go while he was like that. Already, I worried about coming home and finding him hanging from the ceiling. Driving home from my job in Portland, I'd usually skip the interstate to take a dark forest line road. It was often dark and smoggy, and I was teaching myself to sing. One of the songs I practiced was The Big Picture by Bright Eyes, a slow sort of sad/hopeful song. I'd be singing and straining to see past the fog, and I'd get a flash of Jay in the bathtub in a pool of his blood. But that never happened. What did happen was he came back, and it happened how it always did. Very suddenly. It was a few days after Christmas, and I was sitting on the couch in the living room reading a book when he walked in and said, "I need new pants." I looked up at him, alarmed. His voice was clear and crisp, and he was looking right at my face. "Okay," I said. "Will you go to the mall with me to get some pants?" "Okay." He chattered all the way to the mall. If you interviewed someone who saw us at the Gap that day, I think they would have said, "That was a happy couple," or "Those two really like pants." When we got home, he went to his music room. I'll explain the layout a little more. Like I said, it was an old music shop. so it had 4 small practice rooms. The front and back one the landlord used as storage, and the middle 2 served as our bedroom and a space where Jay had a futon, his guitars and computer. This is where he had spent the past half a year. He didn't close the door behind him, but by habit I went to my usual spot, the couch in the living room. A minute later he called out my name. "Yay, where are you?" I came to his music room, sat next to him on the futon, and we hung out for the next 7 months. Snoop Dogg needs to take a beat here and slow down. A year before we moved to Oregon City, my therapist asked me to describe Jay. I said he was like clear blue water. "You describe things how my son would." My therapist told me he is a kinesthetic communicator. Before I figured that out, we were having trouble communicating because I focused on words and I thought saying "I love you" was enough. But he needed an arm squeeze or a pat on the hand. The words alone don't mean much to him. "I guess I'm like that," I said. I always ask my clients in their first session to describe someone in their life so I can find their communication style. Most people will describe either how they look, those are visual communicators, or they'll list off a few of their traits. That's what I would have done. Okay. You describe what he feels like to you. You know less than 10% of people are kinesthetic communicators. How do you feel about that? I don't know. I guess that's cool. So people who are, say, auditory communicators, they tend to connect very well with others who are dominant in that communication style. Like when you hear people say that they click with someone they just met. Very likely it is because they have the same communication style. But for you and my son, that's going to be less than 10% of people you meet. Well, with auditory, it's a good 50% and around 40 for the visuals. How does that make you feel now? Lonely, right? He paused. I think for you to feel less lonely, it would be a good skill for you to work at recognizing what communication styles people around you have. And then you can work on meeting them at their style. Like what I did for my son. I nodded. He had me write down a website that talked about the communication styles and tips on how to figure out who is who. I realized Jay was a fellow kinesthetic communicator because of the way he set the pads of his fingers near the top of my sternum. And we did click the day we met. I met him because I was looking for a room to rent and he was renting out a room. He was on the porch in a plain red tee and his hands awkwardly in his pocket when I walked up. He was thin and had sort of a clean-cut look besides his dark, messy curls. I opened the gate, stepped into the grassless wet yard. His dog ran up and I shielded myself against her muddy paws. The house looked run down. My friends had warned me this wasn't a great part of town, but within 2 minutes of talking to Jay, I knew I was taking the room. He hadn't even showed it to me yet. We were still on the porch while he talked sort of quietly and firmly with a slow, comforting energy that put me at ease. I rented the basement room and Jay lived out back in a disconnected garage where he had several old mattresses serving as walls, like a maze, that led to either his bed or an area with a sink and rocking chair. "I like to sit here and rock," he told me. While I was intrigued by this, I'll admit I was concerned. I knew Portland was a meth town and someone who likes to sit and rock in their mattress maze seemed like possible meth behavior. Someone on meth wouldn't be so calm, but I didn't know. I asked a couple people who lived in the house. "So that Jay guy, do you know if he does any hard drugs?" "Yeah, we can't really figure that out about him," one guy said, seeming to understand why I'd asked. "I seen him smoke weed. That's it," the other said. Within a month, I moved into the garage with Jay, and we were in there doing some mushy stuff like slow dancing to the radio. I told him he was the most attractive person I'd ever looked at, and I meant it. "No, that's you," he grinned. He told me about a memory from preschool where he watched a boy and a girl sit across from each other on the carpet, and the boy would lean in and give her a quick peck on her lips, and then she'd lean in and they went back and forth. We sat on the floor and reenacted. I had just moved to Portland from Chicago. Looking back, I recount my first handful of years in Portland as probably my happiest. Our rent was dirt cheap, and with both of us only working a few days a week, it was like we were on a 4-year vacation, driving up the Columbia Gorge, camping out on Mount Hood, and hitting all the little beach towns along the coast. But I don't want to completely sugarcoat this handful of years. I was struggling mentally with chronic shame and embarrassment, and small social interactions were sometimes excruciating. That's why I started seeing my therapist. I was telling him about how I ran into one of my massage clients at a sushi place. I said, it was brief. We pretty much just said hello. But that was 3 days ago, and since then I've been carrying around this feeling in the pit of my stomach, like deep embarrassment or something, or like I'm somehow bad. I guess I feel like a massage therapist should be warm and caring, and I don't feel warm or caring. Do you have a specific massage therapist you see? Yay. Are they warm and caring? Yes, I said. Well, maybe to you it's important to have a warm and caring massage therapist. I see one and he gives very deep pressure, but I wouldn't specifically describe him as warm and caring. I don't need him to be. Don't assume your clients need you to be a particular person. In my journal from that time, I have an entry about how I left work from the back book because I was having too much anxiety to say goodbye to front desk staff. I wrote several pages shaming myself about this. So when Jay would check out, that's what I was alone with. The first time it happened was around half a year in. He drove me to the bank and waited in the car while I went in. We were going to get ice cream after, but when I opened the car door, I was hit with a wave of bad energy. I could see in his expression too that something was wrong. I got in and made a little small talk. He didn't reply. He jolted the car out of park. Is everything okay? I asked. Hey, he grunted. I figured he must have gotten a text he didn't like. I was only in the bank for a few minutes, so I couldn't think what else could have happened during that time. He was driving in the direction of the ice cream place, and I said, we don't have to get ice cream if you're not in the mood. He didn't answer. When we got there, he pressed on the gas and sped past. We were on a pretty busy street with lots of shops and people. So I shouted, you're scaring me, which made him slam on his brakes. He slowly drove forward to where he could pull over. Sorry, he whispered. He bowed his head and just sat there. He was close to tears, so I looked straight ahead to give him privacy. We sat like this for maybe 5 minutes. And then he drove home. For the next few weeks, he scarcely said a word to me. By the 3rd or 4th time he bowed out like that, I started reading about bipolar disorder. The word that popped out to me was cycles. It did feel like we were a big wheel going around and getting snagged in the same spot. I learned there are different types of bipolar that varied in intensity and frequency. And even in the subtypes, there's a wide variation on what a certain person's cycle could look like. Like one person might have an episode only once a year or so, while another could switch from manic to depressive every other month. But that word manic I kept seeing didn't feel relevant. I've seen Jay in better moods than others, but I didn't think I would label any of his behavior as manic. I guess I decided he had some sort of bipolar without the mania, or that he wasn't certifiably bipolar, but we were cycling through something unnamed. So I cycled along with him, sort of priding myself for my patience, as if my lover were off fighting a battle and I was faithfully at home, waiting. And when he returned, we would get to have another honeymoon. Around and around, again and again. Part 2, take a little breather here, Snoop. Okay. In Oregon City, we had our 9th honeymoon, followed by the first and only time I ever saw Jay manic. Unlike his depressive states, his mania did have a lead up. One sign was that he started sleeping in a field a few blocks from our house. And then there was the way he looked at me while I was brushing my teeth. He stood in the doorway watching me with this look in his eyes that was loving and knowing and sad. This look haunted me after we broke up. I would think about how no one would ever look at me like that again. He watched as I flossed, and I walked him through my routine in a lullaby voice. First, I floss under my permanent retain. I do this in 8 slots. He nodded like a toy horse. This tooth has a hole at the top that blood comes out of when I floss around it. I know, he whispered. I see it. That night he didn't sleep out in the field, but wrapped himself tightly around me in our bed in a way that felt the same as the look. I felt like a butterfly in a cocoon. Maybe that was what the knowing in his eye was about. Maybe he knew there was about to be a transformation. Or maybe I was not in a cocoon but a tightly wound web, and by morning I'll have suffocated. In the morning I was still alive, and it was Jay's birthday, and we went out to eat in downtown Portland. Afterwards we walked down the street to the Japanese gardens, a place mostly for tourists that we'd never been. We stood on a bridge in the gardens peering over to see the koi fish. Koi fish aren't like ordinary fish, he told me. They hold meaning and symbolism. I'd be rolling my eyes if most people I knew said something like that. But when Jay talked about nature, I would take it in. Maybe I felt like he had authority because he had been homeless in 3 different states. Or maybe it was the way he would say these things, like it was coming from deep inside, like the way he calls his dog. We were at the dog park once and I was calling for Coco and she wouldn't look up and Jay said, "You have to call directly to her. You can't just shout her name into the air. She can feel the difference." I scoffed at this, but the next time I was alone with her at the dog park, I tried it and it worked like magic. You have to pull the words out from the bottom of your stomach instead of taking them from the throat. It really does sound and feel different. The night of his birthday, I had a koi fish dream. I was lying in my grandma's bed and there was a knock on the window. I look up and a silver and blue koi fish wave, did a backflip and swam away. Then another. The koi kept doing this, each knocking, waving, and doing a playful flip before swimming away in a way that felt both friendly and taunting. When I woke, I looked up the symbolism of the koi. It seemed mostly to be about luck, but also perseverance. I looked up blue and silver, and as dream interpretation often goes, I mushed it all together in a way to represent what I was already feeling. Change is coming. I feel like I should warn you that this story has no climax. It's been leading its way up to this manic episode, as I'm calling it, or whatever it was. But none of it is story climax material. It wasn't exciting. It was just exhausting. There's no main characters either, really, except maybe Oregon City. Jay and I were just 2 tiny pawns floating down the Willamette. Our little music shop home was sandwiched between 2 graveyards, the big one a few blocks ahead and a little one behind us. The big one is the only graveyard I've ever felt afraid walking past. It was lined with a metal black gate and often had pockets of smog floating around like they were caged in, like dead little vapor sheep. The graveyard behind us never had smog like that. The little one was newer, more modern, with plastic memorials on wires stuck into the dirt. It made me think, people who live in haunted houses don't need to go through the whole priest and exorcism thing. Any self-respecting ghost would leave if the owners just went to Target and got a bunch of cheap plastic decor. I was walking Coco there and saw a gravestone with 4 plastic brightly colored watering cans littered around it. I almost took a picture, but didn't. Later that day I was still thinking about it, so I went back to snap a shot. As I approached the stone, an old man came out of a shed and stared right at me, and I felt too weird about it to take the picture. Then the next day, I came back. Twice, the watering cans were still there, but so was the old man both times. It was sort of comical because it wasn't a great shot. I'm sure if I had taken it the first time, I'd never even look at it again. The big graveyard I always assumed was the first in the West, as Oregon City was the first established town. When a friend from Chicago came to visit, we went to the Oregon Trail Museum at the foot of town by the junkyard. We could smell the trash when we got out of the car. It always had a sweet smell to it, like it were a decaying candy factory. The museum is small. It has a room full of animations talking about their journey, and then a gift shop with bonnets and recipe books. The only kind of cool part was the 2 buggies they had parked out front. I tried to imagine them traveling up the city's steep roads. Wouldn't everything fall out the back? I could see why they sort of abandoned this place for Portland and Salem. But also I wondered about the people who stayed. The stubborn ones, the ones tired of traveling, and the depressed. The man running the gift shop told us the Iron Fence graveyard has a section of unmarked graves where they buried people from the insane asylum. It was filled mostly with women, he said. People lost people when they came over on the wagons, family that stayed behind, people who died on the trail. Some of them lost children who would wander off to play, and when the wagons started moving again, the mothers would scream and call for their children. If they wandered off too far, they wouldn't be waited for. Then if these mothers showed signs of PTSD or depression, they'd get checked in the asylum. It makes sense to me that this city was founded by these tired and broken people. The town had this constant looming, like every small thing is a foreshadowing. The watering cans, the graveyard man. I felt like I was supposed to piece together what it meant before it played out in a way that could never be taken back. Jay started not coming home until late. He would send me photos of him out at bars with groups of people, usually mostly men, to prove that he wasn't cheating. Okay, so he's not cheating, but he's out bar hopping with what seemed to be different people every night, and I was never invited. I was stuck on this hill. Our hippie landlord and her 20-year-old daughter Lily started coming by to work on the garage. They said they wanted to make it into a living space for Lily, but it didn't make any sense. The garage was barely even a standing structure. It was more like scraps of wood mildly clinging together. She wanted to live in there. They were cleaning out the garage and Lily came into the house holding a rat and asked if I lost a pet rat. No, I told her. Did you get that from outside? Yeah, it was in the garage. I wonder who he belongs to. I don't think that's a pet. It's just a rat. No, my friend used to have pet rats, and they look just like this. I'm going to ask the neighbors. She went out the back door and I heard a scream. Her and her mom rushed in and ran her finger under the sink. The rat bit her. Are you okay? Do you think you should get a rabies shot? I asked. Oh no, my landlord said in a sing-songy voice. She doesn't need a rabies shot. The thing was harmless. It's probably scared out of its mind. I wonder how long it's been lost. I waited for Jay to come home so I could tell him about the rat, but when he walked in the door, he told me he wasn't real and that he didn't know who I was. He said when he was sleeping, a voice woke him up saying, "You don't know her," and he realized the voice was right. I thought about this. If the only person I talked to doesn't know me, then who was I? He said he didn't want to live anywhere anymore. I would have just lived in my car after the other house foreclosed. He told me. But you would have never done that, so I've been wasting all my money on this place. Well, I don't want to live in Oregon City. I hate Oregon City. I said, you're the reason we're here. It's because you won't get a real job. See, you just want me to work so you can have a house or some shit. I don't care about houses. I never have. I'm a fire tiger. He was referring to his Chinese zodiac, and you've never liked that about me. What, bro? I'm moving back to Portland. You go ahead and live here or nowhere. I don't care. I spent the next few days packing and found a room to sublet in Southeast. Luckily, it was the end of the month, so I didn't have to wait long to move. On my very last night in Oregon City, I had this dream about a brown little alien. I was sitting on my bed with an ex-boyfriend when the alien walked in. My ex shrieked and propelled himself back towards the wall. This is my husband, I said defensively. The alien didn't speak or show emotion, but I was offended for him. I scooted up towards the foot of the bed where he stood and I massaged his shoulders. I looked back at my ex, whose face was still twisted in fear. Hey, if you're going to act like this, I think maybe you should leave, I said. Then I woke up. But I wasn't for sure if I had woken up because there was a man standing at the foot of my bed. My glasses were off, so he was a blur of a figure, but I could tell he was very tall and bald and dressed in these baggy clothes. I was still thinking about the dream as I stared at him. What freaks me out now when I look back on this was how long I stared at him and how he just stood there looking back. Eventually he walked out of the room, but I could see his shoulders still. He was standing in the hallway with a small bit of his shoulders still in the room. Jay, I called out. Yes, the man answered in a voice like he was the wolf pretending to be Little Red. This voice shocked me deeply and I sprang out of the bed and jolted towards him. He shrieked and ran. We were both running, and he was making these fucked up squealing noises like a rodent. I chased him out the front door, which was open, past the dog who just stood there calmly with her tongue hanging out, and into the gravel driveway. My bare feet pounded into the rocks until I reached the sidewalk and stopped. I watched the blurred figure run down the street. What was I going to do if I caught him? I had no plan. I looked out into the street where there were several cars stopped at the light. I couldn't see in at the faces, but I could feel eyes on me standing there in a pair of panties and a thin undershirt. Goodbye, Oregon City. I thought at them. Goodbye forever and ever. Within the next few weeks, Jay joined about 7 bands, got arrested for a hit and run. He came to my work and hopped around on one foot in the parking lot, and he tried pawning his dog off to several people at dog parks. That's why he left our door wide open my last night in Oregon City when he left for work. He was hoping his dog would wander out and get hit by a car. He would pace back and forth saying things about his dog, like that she ruined a bunch of people's lives. I asked, like whose? But he didn't reply. He was very angry at his dad for letting him get a dog. But Jay was in his 20s in San Francisco when he got hurt, and his dad was all the way in Philly. He also quit what little work he was doing and got into witchcraft. The first time I came back to his place, a few weeks after leaving, he had a little altar set up with green candles, and he had written a little rhyme on a post-it that said something like, "Money, money, come to thee. Get a fucking job." I thought, exasperated. I let him buzz around because of how deeply I missed him. But seeing him brought no relief. He was completely different now. He had fast energy. He would invite himself over, and then he'd sit on his phone for maybe 20 minutes before springing up and saying he had to go. His friend's show was about to start. He'd text like he wanted to be with me, and then when he was with me, he couldn't wait to leave. And I felt the same. I thought about him day and night, and then when I saw him, I wanted him gone. I cut it off eventually. He did call me months after the breakup. His voice sounded soft and slow like it used to. And he said he was just now realizing that he lost me. But I signed a year's lease somewhere. I had spent months in bed healing. I was just starting to feel okay-ish. Maybe old Jay was back. But there'd be no honeymoon this time.